At the time of this video, Resident Evil Requiem is the third highest scored game on Metacritic by user score with a 9.3 rating, matching the equally legendary Disney's Cory in the House game and its equally impressive 9.3 user score. But honestly, I mention user scores because I feel like mainstream critics are kind of BS. Like for me, what matters the most are the opinions of actual people, of a large amount of people, rather than a selected few. And this is a game that definitely deserves the praise it's getting, or well, it got a few months back. So in this video, I'm going to cover both negative and, more importantly, the positives that RE9 has to offer, taking a bit of a more calmer look at the game a few months after its release. The first half of the game takes place in Rhodes Hill, and this is the part where I genuinely think this is one of the best sections of any game ever made. Maybe even the best. Literally, it just flows so well, story-wise, gameplay-wise. I consider it actually quite perfect, or very near perfect. The way Capcom managed to pull off a character that's almost pure horror and another one that is almost pure action with Leon shouldn't have even been possible. And the reason it shouldn't have worked is because of the extreme contrast between the two gameplay styles. Like in most games, that kind of shift feels quite jarring, but somehow Capcom pulled it off. Or well, the devs and everyone working around RE9. Both characters feel great to play, Grace and Leon. That said, I'd give Grace's sections the edge. I'll say that they are a bit better, since Leon's sections feel a bit less layered and were more about running and shooting. There wasn't really much thought behind approaching the game with Leon rather than with Grace, where you actually had to think about different ways to approach certain sections. When you play as Grace, you have almost the same freedom and exploration opportunities as in RE2 Remaster, for example. You're allowed to explore and gradually learn the layout of the Rhodes Hill Care Center, and it flows so well. Every room you enter for the first time feels very fresh. It genuinely feels like your mind is sort of expanding as you start connecting the dots. It really feels just like the original RE2 and also the remake. The first thing you may notice in really not the first half of the game or Rhodes Hill, but the whole game in general, is the zombies' behavior, or the infected. It's not just that they seem to have personalities or repeat actions that they might have done when they were still human. The way they sort of attack and move and wander around is, in my opinion, the sort of best representation of zombies in any game. They feel very unpredictable, fucked up, and genuinely threatening. Well, besides with Leon, where it's just a shit show. But yeah, with Grace, you really have to think about how you approach each zombie. And yeah, a lot of that comes from Grace's close perspective and the fact that, unlike Leon, you cannot simply run around blasting everything on sight. And that allowed me to really appreciate all the updates Capcom made to the zombies themselves. Because I remember them sort of advertising this sort of new behavior of the zombies, that they did things that they used to do when they were human. But for me, the most impressive thing was how they actually behaved on combat and outside of combat. And yeah, the way they were very unpredictable and felt like actual zombies. Well, what I would think zombies would be like, because I have not seen a zombie of real life, or anybody hasn't, I think. And also, the second thing you may notice mostly on this first half of the game is Grace's blood mechanic, which is incredible. This feels like a system specifically designed to elevate the survival aspect of survival horror games. There are plenty of games that claim to be survival horror but end up feeling more like just action horror. They lack systems that actually reinforce the survival side of the genre. Most importantly though, I've never found it annoying or restrictive. I feel like this new like grace blood system added tension without getting in the way, which is exactly what you want in a survival horror game. So to wrap up the Rhodes Hill section, which I consider one of the best sections in gaming in general, and it is a very long section before you get to actual Raccoon City, which I'm going to talk about next, and it is that it is simply one of the most impressive stretches of any game I've played in over 20 years. Honestly, this first half alone, Rhodes Hill, is worth the full $70 retail price. Like, absolutely. And now is the time to talk about Raccoon City, which is what I consider the much weaker half of the game, or the part that I don't consider much as a masterpiece or as near as perfect Rhodes Hill was. I won't spoil any plot points or major story moments, only locations and a few gameplay details. And to be clear, this isn't a bad section at all. It is still great. The problem is that it is nowhere near as good as what came before it in Rhodes Hill. Let's start with what I consider the biggest downgrade, which is in this half of the game, you barely play as Grace. The incredible dynamic that Requiem or Capcom created or enhanced, since multiple playable characters already existed in Resident Evil before, it just simply isn't present to the same degree here, like what we had in Rhodes Hill. A huge part of what people praise Requiem for is the contrast between Grace and Leon. Their gameplay styles are so different that switching between them constantly keeps things really fresh. But once you reach Raccoon City, that dynamic almost just disappears. Honestly, like my opinion or what I think what happened is that it feels like Capcom had a crystal clear vision for Rhodes Hill and what Arena 9 was going to be and built the entire game's identity around that first half. Then, once they got past it and had to end the game, they weren't quite sure how to maintain that same momentum. That's the feeling I got while playing it. Not that the second half is bad, but it feels more like improvised and less focused than everything that came before it. To get more into details about this criticism, there is this open area that I see a lot of people praising, so take this as a potential personal preference thing. But early on in Raccoon City, you are given an objective called Collect the Detonator Parts. And the structure of this mission reminded me a lot of Resident Evil 4 Remake, although the area itself is much more enclosed. The problem is, for me, that the objective takes up a surprisingly large chunk of the playthrough, and because the area is divided into three main sections, the progression of this area or of this objective becomes predictable very quickly. Personally, I would have preferred if that chunk of the game would have been spent more on exploring a larger area of Raccoon City, or more like isolated sections from the games from before, which you do, like the RPD, but absolutely not as much. One thing I always loved about, and it's kind of the main thing I really love the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, is that it genuinely felt like you were exploring Raccoon City. Few games have captured that feeling to the same extent. Like Requiem shows a decent amount of Raccoon City, enough that I wasn't disappointed, and also getting to revisit the RPD was incredibly cool. But I still think the quote-unquote collect the detonator parts section was a missed opportunity. The progression could have remained largely the same while giving players more freedom to explore Raccoon City that's been sitting there just abandoned 28 years since the bombing. Now the positive stuff or good stuff, which the first one is a little one, which is that I appreciate that the Porsche partnership they had ended up being a very small part of the game. I was worried they were going to milk it for what it was worth and try to sort of implement it as much as possible, but it was actually like very brief and just wasn't annoying, which some games, when they partner with other companies, they tend to plaster it around the whole game. But in this case, it just wasn't the case. Also, Leon feels exactly how he should in terms of gameplay and also story, if not better than what I expected. Because before release, I was worried Capcom would simply just copy and paste Leon's gameplay from Resident Evil 4 Remake into Requiem, and thankfully that just wasn't the case. The controls are of course familiar, if not the same, but Leon's options have been expanded considerably, especially thanks to the hatchet. The way he moves and handles weapons feel like a natural evolution of what we saw in Resident Evil 4 Remake. It's very similar to the difference we saw between the Leon in Resident Evil 2 Remake, which he was a rookie cop, or well, maybe first day cop, and Resident Evil 4 Remake, which shows that in-between experience. So you can actually feel those years of experience reflected in the gameplay. And Requiem takes that concept one step further. This is an older, more experienced Leon, and Capcom does an excellent job translating that into the way he plays. The arc is the final section of the game, which I still consider to be the second half of the game, since it's tied to the Raccoon City portion of the story, and also it's below Raccoon City. And well, it's the classic underground lab that we're used to seeing in Resident Evil games. That said, I think this is one of the better ones compared to something like, of course, the hideous Resident Evil 3 Remake's lab, which was absolutely atrocious, and Arc is a huge step up. This is also where the game brings back Grace and Leon's dynamic, and it's great to see it return. The difficulty is ramped up since this is the end game, but it never feels like unfair. It's challenging, tense, and exactly what you want from the final stretch of a survival horror game. Leon is at his full potential here with everything upgraded, or most of the things upgraded. It feels like a proper endgame version of the character, both mechanically and from a gameplay perspective. And with Grace is the same thing we saw in Rhodes Hill, but really in a more quick and short manner. Like, you're not going to explore this entire quote-unquote care center and unlock things. It's mainly just a few enclosed areas that you need to do some things to get through them. When I started playing back as Grace, I was really glad that dynamic was brought back, at least at the end. Narratively, I don't like the ending quite as much. I won't spoil anything, but if you haven't played the game, don't go in expecting some insane twist or one of the franchise's all-time greatest endings. That's not to say it's bad, but it doesn't hit the same highs as some of the stronger endings of the series. And to wrap up the second half, it's still an incredibly great half by the standards of most video games, but the problem is when you compare it to the first half of the game. You can definitely feel that drop in quality. Resident Evil Requiem, or RE9, is a 9.5 out of 10 for me. It's still a ridiculously high score, well, for me. I pre-ordered the game, and also, sorry, this review took so long to come out, but when I first booted up the game on February 27 and played through those first few days, it felt incredible. Then the experience started to dip a little bit during the second half, which is what this entire review is about. But after finishing the game and spending a few months just thinking about it, reflecting on it, and letting it sort of settle, and seeing some of the gameplay footage back, I can confidently say that Resident Evil Requiem was one hell of an experience. Even with my criticisms, the highs of this game are so strong that they almost outweigh everything else. The second half keeps it from being, for me, a masterpiece from beginning to end, but the first half is so good that I still consider RE9 one of the greatest survival horror games ever made.